Thank you. Yeah, I'm Matt Handrahan, Senior Portfolio Manager for Kepler Interactive. It's quite intimidating following a talk that's so focused on practical details and actual useful information. My job is mainly about vibes and like trying to find games that articulate what we want to represent as a brand and as a company, and we're quite kind of high-minded when it comes to that stuff. But this is the first game that was kind of the main reason why we signed it when I arrived. It was a few months after, and it was quite a good one to be your first game, I would say. Reason being, this nice sales figure, which has happened in about 10 months or so. I'll say this game is not made by Kepler, it's made by Ironwood Studios, which is a new studio founded by a guy called Alex Draycott, who'd worked at Sony Online Entertainment, Sucker Punch, and Oculus. He's like a tech artist, but he's the creative director and CEO of this company. The other key figure in development, obviously the team is larger than that, is a guy called Seth Rosen, who worked at Irrational, Clay Entertainment, Hangar 17. He was the game director and lead designer on this. I think it's important to make sure people understand that we're not taking ownership of how good the game was. But it's a really talented team, and I think the thing that they did the best was pull from interesting sources of inspiration. So I thought there would be lessons, but actually there's really just a lesson that I'm going to dig into a bit more deeply, and a couple of things at the end if we get time. But this is kind of based on what we see from the pitches that we receive every single month, and what makes a game stand out. Not signed, I will say, because all you can really do, I think, is try and ensure you're in the top sort of 5% of games that anybody's looking at. And that varies from company to company, so I'm talking mainly about Kepler here. A little bit on me. I was a journalist for a long time. Magazines, then that crumbled into dust. And then I went on websites, and that also started to disintegrate before my very eyes. And so I made the jump into publishing in 2021. Got a job at PlayStation on their third-party portfolio team. So that's the team that signed Stray and Kenna and Sifu and like those kinds of games, like not first or second, just the stuff that they bring into the platform. And I don't work for Nintendo, but Kepler Interactive and Kowloon Knights. So I think the significance of this context is that most of my roles have revolved around finding the most interesting, original, unique ideas, people, and games. In journalism, that's what people want to read about. At Sony, through their third-party arm is really where they try and bring in games that actually boost the brand. It's not necessarily about sales so much. They have a pot of money. They can hand it out. But it's really about getting games onto the platform that help build a better idea of what PlayStation is and communicate certain values. You probably are all familiar with Kowloon Knights. It's an independent indie game investment fund that was operated, I think, on similar principles. I mean, the games there, what you've got, Shadow Gambit, Sea of Stars, Spiritfarer, and Scorn. They all begin with S, but that is not one of the tips of how to get signed by us. But they are all quite creative games. They're all doing something a bit different. They're also all visually very, very beautiful, and that is also something that we pride. Sorry, my screen is locking up. Yes, where was I? So now I work at Kepler Interactive, which is founded by the same group of people that founded Kowloon Knights, and it has a similar set of creative values, which is to say, we don't really go out into the market looking for games on the basis of market analysis, market research. We use some trends, but ultimately what we believe is that really interesting, original, and creative games always have an audience that transcends genre. So up here we have Flintlock, Cat Quest, Chia, and Sifu. I mean, I think visually they're all pretty astounding games. That's like the common ground. But beyond that, they're all quite different in their own ways. And we kind of select games on that basis. My role is really to be one of the tastemakers at the company, to be one of the handful of people that decides what we sign on the creative level. We have checks and balances after that, but it's our job to bring in really interesting stuff, and Pacific Drive is an example of that. So when I announced this talk on LinkedIn, an old colleague of mine, Kirk, said this: I hope you walk onto the stage, lean into the mic and whisper, "Good video game," before walking back behind the curtain, which is not a useful piece of advice, but it actually was quite useful to think about, because it did make me question, well, is all we do sign the good video games that we see? And the reality is that in the context of what we do, I think the word good would have to do so much heavy lifting. There's so much, there's nuance and caveats within that makes the term good not good enough. And here's the other thing. So, I really can't see this, but the stat at the top was provided to me by Jason Della Rocca, who's like a figurehead of the Canadian games industry and knows lots of cocktail bars all over the world. Those are his two main areas of expertise. He surveyed all of the publishers in his contact book, which is a big contact book, and was expecting that the ratio of games that were pitched to signed would be about 1%, and this is what he got back, 0.2%. At Kepler, we get about 1,500 pitches a year, conservatively, probably more, as close to 2,000. It kind of goes up and down. Certainly around GDC and Gamescom, we're getting 200, 250 a month. It's really, really hard to look through that stuff. You need to make quite quick decisions on a lot. And again, this talk, I think, is about not being in the quick decisions rather than being the game that's signed, because that's a little bit more difficult. But in any case, we say no to good games every single week. Like multiple good games every week with high-quality prototypes of vertical slices from experienced teams that can definitely deliver on what they're promising. But that is not necessarily going to be the thing that gets them signed. And I think that's something that, as developers, it's good to remember. I think the point is that every publisher and developer needs a response to this situation. On our side, it's this number, 14,000 games released on Steam. For you guys, it's the fact that we get 2,000 pitches every single year. For us, it's that there are 14,000 games released on Steam every single year. And we both need to come up with our own individual responses to how to tackle that. As a publisher, I think there's multiple ways you can go. You can be like, say, Hooded Horse. Hooded Horse has kind of identified a space that it can master and own. From what we've seen, it comes in quite late on projects when there's already quite a bit of traction and picks it up. It doesn't invest a lot of money in the project. It's much more about bringing it to market, and it's making it work really, really well. I mean, for us, I think it's a little different. I think that we see playing it safe in terms of genre or catering to established audiences is quite risky now. I think we are more and more, and this is difficult, right, because it's kind of untested. It worked with Pacific Drive. We have games coming up which were signed with the same mindset. But the more that a game breaks from convention, the easier it's going to be to market, the more people will be naturally drawn towards it. I think that is kind of how we're thinking about it, because we have released games and other people have released games, expensive games, high production values, but they kind of fit too neatly into a part of the market and they just get lost almost immediately. Whether or not that Steam number gets higher, I don't know, but I think we can expect it to stay at least where it is, if not get bigger, and lots of things are getting lost. So I think if you're making something that fits very neatly into a genre, you kind of need perfect execution now. If you're not, you don't necessarily need that perfect execution. I don't think Pacific Drive is a perfect game. I think it has some rough parts because of its ambition, and that's not to denigrate it, but I think if you're doing something, if you're putting together ideas in unusual ways, I think you can get away with a lot more in that respect. So I asked the people I work with what are the things we keep on seeing over and over and over again in our pitches. What are the most common themes? And this is mostly on the kind of the narrative, world-building, visual direction side. You have Lovecraft, you have the big three mythologies, Norse, Greek, Egyptian. What's that one up there? Oh yeah, Lord of the Rings and its various descendants, right? So you can count Magic the Gathering in there, you can count Dungeons and Dragons in there. Ghibli, zombies, the undead are still like the go-to for a basic enemy type in so many games. Military history there, and Star Wars over there. Now, I think there are publishers for whom building a game around any of these themes or influences would be seen as a good thing, like something solid, something safe, something dependable with a track record of hit games. I think for us now, like if we see a very strong influence in any of these places, it kind of dissuades us a little bit. It's too familiar. There are too many games they can sit alongside and get lost in comparison to. This is something I thought about a lot while I was a journalist as well. So there's a couple of quotes here. Now, I don't think Warren Spector or Alex Hutchinson would thank me for quoting them again, because these are quite old quotes, but I kind of want to give you a sense that this is an idea that has been put forward over and over again. As a journalist, people told me this all the time. But yeah, so Warren Spector was talking about a kind of a sameness in games. A lot of this has been addressed now, because this was pre-indie pretty much, but I do think some of it is still relevant. The sameness comes from many developers who have no experience of life other than, I've played a lot of games, I love games, let me make games. You end up with games about other games and not about life. So that's a real issue. We'll start telling better stories when people who have interesting things to say start making games. I don't think I'd agree with him 100% on there, because I don't think it's just about storytelling, and also I don't think it's about having no life experience. I think it's actually just about defaulting to what you know too much. I hear pitches all the time. You do see the same references coming up again and again. Alex Hutchinson was a creative director at Ubisoft, said a similar thing in a talk I saw recently. These quotes have kind of stayed with me over my career. Be inspired by the world outside of games. This is less and less true now. I think he was talking here about the kind of the demographics that make up the game development population, which I think is still an issue, but it's kind of eased over time. If you imagine a basic inspiration backdrop of any game designer, you'll realize that we all watch the same TV shows, we're all dressed basically the same, and we all play the same sort of games. Be fresh, make sure your starting point, the first idea you have, isn't how much you love Star Wars. No matter how awesome Star Wars is, we don't need another one. So you can swap Star Wars out for any number of other properties, I think, some of the ones on the previous slide. The other thing that's interesting as a kind of a contrast to this is this Twitter event happened in the last year. Developers sharing their non-game related inspirations. So you see the game in the top left, you see the inspirations around it. That's an article from Rock Paper Shotgun that might be a good one to seek out, because it links to a lot of these. But you can, I think it's really good to go in there, because you'll see some games pulling from very, very familiar sources, and you'll see some games like this one, Suspiria, Vertigo, Requiem for a Dream. I mean, sign me up. Like, that sounds like a super interesting mix of influences. So to get back to Pacific Drive, so these are the key influences for Pacific Drive. Now, I don't think any of them are, like, they're not super niche, right? You have Roadside Picnic and Stalker. Stalker's the Tarkovsky movie based on the novel. Roadside Picnic, you have Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy. That's probably the more famous of those two. You have the game Jalopy, and then you have actually driving a car alone, which is actually the real place that Pacific Drive came from. Alex is based in the Pacific Northwest. He spent an awful long time driving up and down lonely highways, and he talks about the sense of freedom, but also kind of terror that inspires, right? Like, you're in this vast landscape, which is quite calming, but if your car breaks down, you're basically screwed. And that is where it starts from. Alex Hutchinson worked at Maxis, and in that same talk, he talked about where The Sims came from, which was Will Wright lost his house in a flash fire. And it was a combination of him thinking about everything that he'd lost and what it was really worth to him, and then Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a motivational theory from the 1950s. And that produces a game. I think these are interesting things to think about, and definitely in some of your favorite games, or the games that you really look to and admire, you can dig in and see actually where they came from, particularly if they seem different in that way. Being very aware of time at this point. So this is a quote from Seth Rosen. I think this does a good job of summarizing why Pacific Drive feels so different. It's a very embodied first-person narrative experience. It has roguelite run-based elements, it has procedural generation, it's an immersive sim, it's a survival crafting game, it's a driving and vehicle modification game, it's got extraction looter aspects to it, it's got a battle royale collapsing storm, the quirk system was inspired by Return of the Obra Dinn, it draws in things from all over the place. We get a lot of pitches that read a bit like an equation, like Hades times Balatro divided by another game equals my pitch. You couldn't do that with Pacific Drive. And when we started with your description, Eric, right? Like it's on the Steam page, we came up with that, but actually it doesn't really give the full picture. And I do think that the more Pacific Drive doesn't lean too hard on any one influence. It takes very small parts of different things. And fun fact, Seth Rosen actually hates survival games, and he designed all of the survival mechanics as a response to the games he doesn't enjoy playing. I think if he'd just been a huge Valheim guy, Pacific Drive might have ended up being a little bit more conventional what it was, and maybe losing itself a little bit in the market as a result. So I think this GIF on the left, we're into the actual practical, useful advice now. I think this also shows how visual Pacific Drive is in terms of like how clearly it communicates its ideas through visuals. Super useful for marketing. I think when you have like a unique combination of elements, you can create images like this: the lonely garage, the moody lighting, all of like the homebrew modifications you can add on, and it's a powerful image that got loads of traction on Twitter and got lots and lots of organic attention. I've got 4 minutes left, so I'm going to do a very quick summary of the next thing. So one thing that's true about Pacific Drive, this is my other 2 lessons, right, is that I'd seen this game before. Kowloon turned down this game. I maintained a relationship with this team, and as I said, when I found out they were running out of money, I sprinted across the pack, and I don't sprint very often, but I ran to find them so that we could be the people that picked them up. I think when you get a no, it can be quite discouraging, but it doesn't mean a no forever, and publisher will generally make it quite clear if they see some promise in your idea, and I would definitely hold on to that. And if you make significant progress and you still need that, reach out to everybody. Absolutely everybody. Don't ever take an option off the table for yourself, because the worst that happens is you get another no, and the best that happens is maybe you get picked up because something's starting to come through. The other thing is this. This is really important. At Kepler, we do offer deals that are for teams that want to self-publish. I do still see too many developers that just assume that the publisher is there to do all of that community building for them. I think how busy the market is now, how busy Steam is now, means that you just can't think that anymore. I would act like I was self-publishing from the very first day you start making your game. I would have someone in your team that's quite comfortable with that, if you possibly can. We definitely do get a lot of pitches from developers who are 18 months into production and have 200 Twitter followers and just are not even thinking about it. I wouldn't worry about unveiling a Steam page too early or anything like that. I think quite soon, if you don't have a decent number of wish lists, it will be like 90% sure you're not going to get signed. I think we're already kind of there. Ironwood was doing this. Like when we came in, they had something. We really just amplified it, and because of the game they made, it was quite a simple task of getting people to be interested. So it's that combination of the idea being so interesting, original, pulling in all those influences, and also not taking their eye off the ball when it comes to their own responsibility to make sure people know that it's there. So yes, you want a publisher, but I would never assume it, and I would act like you're never going to get one. And I think that's it. Thanks.
All right, Matt, thank you. You were looking at the time, but look at you, man. You have time to spare. So, questions? Oh, yeah, all the way in the back. You want to throw this?
Not really.
No? All right. Can you throw it all the way back there?
No. Okay, that's for me. I'm not sure. I can't see behind me. So, I had a question about the part where you mentioned about sometimes that you pass on good games every month. My question is more about what does define for you, right, or for the company, what is a good game and a perfect game, or a signed-on game, a potential one? What makes the differences for me?
What was that third option? A game to sign.
So signed and perfect game, essentially to be signed for. What is the differences between a good and a signed game?
Yeah, so it's difficult to say because, I mean, ultimately these are just words being assigned to different things, right? Like, I think that, I guess the first answer would just be that good, I don't think implies good enough anymore. Like, it implies that it's good, you know, it's fine, it serves its need, it's well made or whatever. But as I said with Pacific Drive, like it is very well made, but it's so ambitious. There's some things I think the team would admit that could be a lot better. Like its Metacritic, I think is sort of 77, 78. So it's not perfect. I was going to include a picture of one of the 4 and 5 out of 10 reviews it got. It got a lot of cool reviews from big sites, but it actually didn't matter because what the game was, when you show it to people, they're like, I want to play it. That's the signing thing, and it's what I said at the start. Like, it really is vibes at a certain point. It's an X factor thing. I just think that, playing it safe just doesn't really have that much value. So I think I would classify Good as a game that you could easily put in the context of 1 or 2 other games. Like, you know, we've got so many different versions of Hades put in front of us now, and they shift to a different mythology or they take from a different literary source. But like Hades is an almost perfect game, and you can't. It just forgets how brilliant the writing is, or how original that kind of structure and the feedback into the next loop was, and just it almost kind of minimizes what that game is and what it did so well. I'm very conscious of the fact that this is not hard and fast advice. Because the reason why I focus on influences is because if you're going to the same well as everybody else, the chances of you making that signing game, at least for us, is lower. But I can't speak for Team 17, Raw Fury, and so on, all of the others. This is just the way we look at it, because we want our games to, when put together, create an identity for our company that it's, I don't know, we want to be cool, I guess. Maybe that's it. But yeah, sorry, that may not be a great answer to your question, but it's the best I've got.
It's perfectly fine.
All right, so Matt, you got 2,000 pitches a year, right?
Yeah.
So how do you handle that? How big is your team?
Well, the group of people that look at them is about, it can fluctuate depending on who's busy with what, but about 6 people, 7 people. So if you look at that as 150 a week, a month, so 150 a week would be truly crazy, but 150 a month, we're all taking about, say, 20 of those or 30 of those. And actually, you can break it down. You can do sort of 3 or 4 a day, and you get through your quota. Some of them you can say no to very, very quickly, but we have a series of cuts, right? Some things go out in the first cut, some things go out in the second, the best stuff goes to a third. And then it goes to like the committee. I'm on that committee that really talks very carefully about generally 1 a week maximum, I would say, so maybe 2 sometimes. But like we really cut from that to the very few games. There's no perfect way of doing it. We'd love to spend 2 hours on every game, but the reality is most publishers, you've got 20 or 30 minutes of their time, I think, to make a real big impression, which is why playing to what everybody knows is, I think, going to be increasingly difficult, because at that point, it's all about the execution, and you can't really demonstrate that with a pitch deck and a prototype. So it's just something to think about there.
All right, so you get projects in different states of completion, right?
Yeah.
So what is the least you need to make an?
With us,
Yeah.
A pitch deck and a build, but we're not going to sign anything without a build unless it's a sequel or a spiritual successor, or you're a company that's made games in a specific style for the entire time of your existence, so you can know that company can deliver. But it's such a buyer's market now, not that it ever wasn't, but it's to such a degree now that you can't really just send someone a pitch deck and like a grey box prototype and stand much of a chance of getting a deal. I can't speak for other publishers, but I'd be reasonably confident that would be the case. If you're super giant and you've got a pitch deck, everybody's going to want it, for sure. But most people, they're coming at it game 1, maybe game 2. Not many studios last that long. So you've just got to allow for that. Like you really can't come in without something that people can play that gives a really good account of what you're going for.
All right, that makes sense. I have a question here. Where's the mic? All right. Try to not to hurt anyone. Oh, I just said don't hurt anyone. Again.
Sorry, my bad.
Dropping like flies out there.
God. Seems such a good idea at the time.
I was wondering, when you do get, of course, one of the, 150 pitches a month, what kind of signs do you see in a game's concept potentially that it might have been too premature for it to try to get publishers and such?
Well, I think with us, if we think we're interested in signing, we're going to ask for something like a game design document or something that really articulates progression, mid-game, late game, scope, features, all of that stuff. Like we do have due diligence. Like I don't want to make it seem like we just see a bunch of weird esoteric influences and just get the checkbook out. That isn't it. But we don't lead with that. We don't lead with the more practical stuff. We start with the more creative, like, you know, idealism, I guess, and then sense check it as we go along. So we're going to want to see that. So you do need to have. You don't need to send us all of that stuff up front. Like, I think you would want to get a pitch deck and the build, like I say, and if we're interested, we'll want to know more. But it is good to have really thought about what the game will be in its full scope. And that's not a promise, right? We don't expect everything in the GDD to be in the final game. We understand it just shows that you've actually really thought about it. You're not just going to be finding your way during development to whatever it is, that you've got a roadmap to work with. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
It does make it clearer. I think in my head I was thinking of like within the pitch deck itself, if you see anything that you think maybe you guys need to work it out a bit more.
I think there's just no one answer to that question.
Yeah.
I think we could get a short pitch deck that would make a really. I mean, pitch deck is marketing basically, right? It's an advertising document, and there's different ways you can do that. I like reading things. I was a journalist. Most people don't like reading things, so I get a 40-page pitch deck. I'm pretty happy. If other people would be happier with a 4-page pitch deck, but I don't think you can overthink that. You should really understand what's special about your game, and it should be there. And I wouldn't undersell it. If you're worried about things getting lost, that's what an appendix is for. Just shove it all to the back and focus on the main message. But I definitely wouldn't leave out too much because you can never assume you'll get the opportunity to be asked the questions that answer the stuff. And I do see that quite a lot. And almost like an assumption that there'll be some 2-hour chat, but we can't do that with everything. Only the stuff that really rises to the top gets that. So, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Cool.
All right, on that note, thank you, Matt.